Hello there, everyone. Today, I'm going to go over the history of hacking and cybersecurity from 1985 to 1995, a little bit of technology and internet history thrown in there as well. However, before we dive right into 1985, we need to look at the state of technology and where things are at in that regards at this point. So we're still in an era before 1985 where the World Wide Web does not exist and communication between computers is done through other means. The main users of computers and the internet at this time is still military, researchers, universities, big businesses, and hobbyists. And this is divided between ARPANET, which is kind of split off from the military at this point and used for kind of government and university and some sneaky personal usage, while the MILNET is created for the military to use. Um, there's about 621,000 home computers at this point, 2,000 internet computers, so really just a very, very, very small amount. The personal internet usage is kind of based off telephone networks. You kind of you dial someone else's number so to connect to them. A revolutionary aspect at this point was the Hayes Smart Modem. So for the Hayes Smart Modem, you can only do one-to-one calls between computers, linking them, and while it worked for some businesses and stuff like that, some sort of automated connections for sort of like multiple person interactions, it was impossible until the smart modem came out and introduced the Hayes command set and allowed for multiple lines of communication between modems, completely changing how internet communication would work from now on. Also, this time we have what's known as phreaking. So, at this point, hacking and phreaking culture are pretty much the same thing. For those that don't know, phreaking is sort of like hacking phones and phone networks. It comes from the word phone plus phreak, which equals phreak. The main kind of use of phreaking right now is one part of it's curiosity from people wanting to explore systems, and two, is people trying to avoid paying phone bills, especially for long distance calls. Um, this is done through the replication of tones. They'd get these devices called blue boxes, and they'd replicate tones back into the phone that would basically allow them to get free calls. They also did some other things by finding kind of free unused lines to call on, and just a bunch of other stuff involving phone lines. And this really serves as sort of the precursor to the hacking culture. So at this point of technology, with the smart modem and the kind of phone calling network-based communication, bulletin board systems come onto the scene. Basically, a bulletin board system is someone will host a server based on a phone number, and it'll be sort of this text-based server where multiple people can dial in at a time, and do a bunch of text-based functions with other people. You can chat in message boards, you can download and post files, you can direct message people, you can play some games, just a whole bunch of functions. I'd almost compare it to a sort of early version of a subreddit or a Discord server where there's kind of one for every single themes. At this point, it's mainly tech savviness because it requires a lot of tech savviness to get onto the bulletin board system. So a lot of these kind of bulletin boards are very much hacking based. And the admins or rulers of these bulletin board systems are known as sysops. So now we're going to head off into 1983. So in this year, released the film War Games. War Games is a 1983 film which followed the actions of a kind of a slacker high school computer enthusiast who somehow gets access to the United States' nuclear defenses, and shenanigans can go from there. And the big thing of this film is that while it seems absurd to us watching it today, even your most average technology user, back in the day, people didn't know anything about hacking. A lot of people thought it was real. A lot of government officials, concerned citizens thought that this is an accurate portrayal of hacking, that hackers could just easily access, nuclear weapons. And so pretty much from the start, painted the perception of hackers to the general populace, which would, have an effect for the next 10 years and still have an effect of how hackers are viewed today. So the world with people up into a panic, usually concerned parents and stuff like that. But also, on the other hand, a lot of kind of high school kids, a lot of kind of outcasts saw this film and got super enthused by technology and sort of rushed out to go learn more about hacking and technology. So it kind of charged up a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Now we're going to move on to 1984. So in 1984, the biggest hacking group, the Legion of Doom, was born. So in the summer of '84, after the release of War Games, kind of interest around computer hacking boomed. So kind of these a lot of these kids come in, and they'll flock these technology-based BBSs to learn more about computers and hacking and such. And so the biggest one of these kind of technology BBSs called Plovernet gets so overwhelmed with traffic that the phone company that's hosting it shuts it down. So then one of the co-sysops of this BBS, Lex Luthor, decides I'm going to start my own BBS, but I'm going to make it sort of exclusive and invite only. So he pulls people from Plovernet and other sort of BBSs and stuff and people he'd met, and decides to form the group known as the Legion of Doom. A lot of these members are Texas-based. Their kind of main kind of goal is just to share kind of secret knowledge in between themselves and, control SysOps and just kind of generally kind of further their own hacking skills. Another kind of interesting note is that a lot of these people are under 18. And actually, the most common reason for people leaving the Legion of Doom is when they have to go to college. So this is really just a bunch of kids at its core. So finally, we're going to move into 1985. So in 1985, the state of New Jersey passes a new criminal statute allowing them to arrest people for hacking crimes. And so as they're exploring a BBS based out of the middle of New Jersey over some credit card fraud investigations, they find similar info on the private sector BBS, which is based out of North Jersey. So just because they found similar information on that BBS, they just kind of assume, oh, people in this BBS are in a conspiracy, they're in on the act. So they go ahead and they see 7 computers along with the sort of BBS server of the private sector and charge the SysOp of the private sector BBS with computer conspiracy. And the media actually went wild with this because they're still kind of affected by sort of war games and that sort of ideology. They think that, there's rumors that you can order tank parts and they, move satellites and all these sort of ridiculous things. But sort of things get somewhat sorted out soon enough where, the prosecutor realizes you can't charge him with computer conspiracy. There's not enough kind of evidence. They try to charge him with wire fraud because his modem can, theoretically be used as a blue box, but then you could arrest anyone that had a modem. So really, the New Jersey police here are really just trying to scramble to pin something on them, and eventually sort of back off after AT&T and the Department of Defense actually come to the defense of these individuals. But this is really kind of the first sort of example of sort of a witch hunt against hackers who, a lot of them weren't really doing that much, or if they were doing some stuff, it was pretty minor. Also in this year is the founding of the e-zine known as Phrack. Phrack is an online magazine, first published on the Metal Shop BBS. It's based out of Texas on November 17th, 1985. It's an amalgamation of the words freak and hack, kind of showing it as a magazine that focuses on both communities. This kind of becomes the tentpole source of information for hacker and freak culture. And basically, it posts articles about, new hacking strategies, technology changes, some internal documents of some companies, and really it's just kind of, the end all be all sort of source of information at this time. And it's also kind of spread out for this. It's posted on the Metal Shop, but once it's posted, it quickly gets spread from BBS to BBS kind of across the nation very quickly. Some other minor events in this year is that a hacking group known as Firm sort of takes control over a bunch of BBSs across the US, Canada, and Europe. It was more kind of just kind of an administrative thing, not like a total aggressive control. And a book called The Hacker's Handbook is published, which describes ways systems could be theoretically hacked. Now let's move on to 1986. So in this year, the Congress and Senate passed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And actually, this is an amendment to a previous act called the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, which that act made computer crime illegal, but it was very vague. And it kind of put the crime under mail and wire fraud, which is very, very hard to convict. But with this new law, it kind of specified what exactly was illegal for a computer crime. Basically, the big thing was unauthorized access to systems and a bunch of other sort of, general hacking stuff that carries a felony charge now. And so this new law, this new very clear law on the books, this gives the federal government the ability to sort of go after hackers now in a much easier way. Also in 1986, the Hacker Manifesto is written. So the Hacker Manifesto is a short article written by a Legion of Doom member known as the Mentor. And he decides to write it in 1986 while in high school after he is arrested for accessing the systems of a bank. He didn't steal any money, but obviously still breaking into a bank is very illegal. But he feels like this punishment is unfair. So, soon after, as he kind of gets done dealing with all the legal trouble, he decides to write the manifesto. And his words sort of clear up all misconceptions and stereotypes he thinks people have about hackers, especially from war games. So, kind of some of the tenets of this manifesto is hacking isn't about personal gain, but instead the furtherance of technology. That it's not weighed down by sort of real world issues of racism, greed, and violence, and sort of just kind of a skill based sort of society. Um, and that for a lot of times, hackers were kind of outcast in the real world, but in this digital world, they kind of felt like they had a home and a place to exist. So since its publishment all those years ago, it is sort of seen as a rallying cry of hackers and technology people all across the world, and kind of a creed for them. And as you can see here, actually, the manifesto features as a poster in the 2010 film Secret Network, as you can see to the right of Andrew Garfield's character. So some other minor events in this year. Two British hackers, Robert Schifrin and Stephen Gould, are convicted in forgery for a 1985 crime of accessing the accounts of Prince Philip illegally. But the crime is actually appealed because the legal definition of forgery is not suitable enough to fit their actions, which will precipitate some later laws the United Kingdom will pass. Then Clifford Stahl, a California astronomer, helps track down and capture a German hacker by the name of Marcus Hess, who had been infiltrating U.S. military computer systems and selling secrets to the Soviet. And then you have the NSFNet is launched. The NSFNet is run by the National Science Foundation and is used to connect universities across the U.S. and becomes one of the first very powerful cross-country networks. So now moving on to 1987. So in this year, a undergraduate student at the Clausel University of Technology in Germany in December created the Christmas tree exec worm. And how this worm worked is that it would prompt the user to type in the word Christmas when they boot up their computer. And if so, it would print out the text start seen on the left and open the CMS names file on the system's computer and send it to everyone on the address list. It's actually very similar to how the I Love You virus worked, which I actually covered in a project earlier in the semester, which is pretty cool. The virus is able to cause a decent chunk of damage to the European Academic Research Network, BitNet, and IBM's VNet. And historians today consider it as the first widely disruptive computer worm. So now moving on to 1988. So in this year, the Morris worm was launched. This is a computer worm created by Robert Morris, who at the time was a graduate student at Cornell, and he decided to launch the worm from MIT November 2nd onto ARPANET. He thought that by launching it at MIT, he could sort of evade ownership of the worm and have it not traced back to him, which didn't really work out for him. But the worm was created to highlight security vulnerabilities. He kind of had a good-hearted nature at this and kind of wanted to show kind of issues of networks and other stuff that he saw. So some of these vulnerabilities were an issue with the debug mode of Unix sendmail, which is a precursor to email, some buffer overflow bugs in the FingerD network. Many remote shells this time did not have password requirements, and individuals having weak passwords in general. So again, he kind of wanted to show, cybersecurity stuff, kind of a white hat hacker mentality in a sort of way. And how this virus spread is that once it infected one computer, it reached out to all other computers in the network and infected them as well. However, trouble sort of came with the worm and its sort of checking protocols. So when a worm would come to a computer, it would check, okay, have I already infected this? And just to kind of avoid issues and make sure, he wanted to make sure the worm got to every single computer it found. He wrote in the code that there's always a 1 in 7 chance for the worm to infect the computer anyway. This sort of, and then spread on to a new computer. This, however, kind of created a kind of doubling effect where computers would infect each other over and over and over again in the same network. So eventually you had computers getting thousands of copies of the worm, and it would just basically slow the computer to a grinding halt. And actually, a lot of people consider this worm to be the forefather of the DDoS attack because it has a similar effect of a virus spanning multiple sort of servers and users at a website. Is kind of the similar thing where it spans multiple copies of a virus at a computer. So eventually, it gets traced back to him. He gets found out and caught. And the damages are assessed to be worth somewhere between $100,000 and $10 million. Robert Morris is the first person ever actually to be tried under the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, and he's just sentenced to a couple months in jail and some community service, kind of more just a slap on the wrist. He ended up getting kicked out of Cornell for this, but he has gone on to have had a pretty successful career, and is actually now a professor at MIT, funnily enough. So in response to the Morris worm and sort of other kind of viruses running around, DARPA decided that there needed to be some sort of kind of defense unit to fight against these viruses and fight for cybersecurity. So they gathered up the brightest minds in the country and founded the Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, Coordination Center at Carnegie Mellon in November. And the goal of the center is to take an active defense in fighting for cybersecurity, whether it's researching vulnerabilities or creating better defense strategies. It's really kind of one of the first sort of defense measures that are taken to make systems more secure. Some other sort of events to happen this year is that 70 million is stolen by hackers from the First Bank of Chicago. And the Father Christmas worm is spread throughout DECnet, but it was discovered very quickly and actually pretty stopped very easily as well. This is because what happened is that to work, the virus would generate a file called hi.com and then print out Father Christmas and act. But once the virus is found out, if you created a hi.com file before the virus came to you, the virus would not work at all. So this is actually one of the first sort of successful defenses against the virus itself. Now we're moving on to 1989. So in 1989, the second most famous hacking group, the Masters of Deception, are founded in New York City. All these kind of members meet in the New York Loop Around. For those who don't know, a Loop Around line is a test line that phone companies use to sort of test out different things. But a lot of times freaks and hackers will find out the number for the Loop Around line and then kind of use it to kind of free hours-long call sessions. So the original members meet in this line and decide to sort of meet up and start doing hacking-based actions in person and digitally all across New York City. And the name Masters of Deception actually comes from Legion of Doom, where M comes a letter right after L in the alphabet. And so this kind of sort of playful jab with Legion of Doom would kind of come up more later as the group will have some tension between them. Also in 1989, the Wank worm was released, or the Worms Against Nuclear Killers worm, by Australian-based hackers on the DECnet networks of NASA and the Department of Energy around mid-October. And this coincided with the Galileo launch, which was controversial because it used plutonium-based fuel, which actually kind of pushed forward for the worm to be sent out as a political statement against nuclear weapons. So if the Wank worm infected your computer, it would display the kind of text-based messages on the right and say it would start deleting a bunch of files. In reality, it just printed this out. No files are deleted, but definitely scared a lot of people on these sort of networks. And how this worm spread is that it used a formula to convert system time into a node address, and then using weak security on a lot of these sort of platforms, because a lot of these people had their usernames equal to their passwords, and so it kind of quickly spread throughout DECnet and throughout other networks in the world. Actually, it's kind of interesting that the programmers made it so that it would not spread in New Zealand and actually kind of banned from like all New Zealand addresses because New Zealand was very anti-nuclear. So it's a very politically based worm, and actually it is the first politically based worm in computer history. Also in 1989, the AIDS Trojan virus was released, this being the first ransomware and first Trojan attack ever carried out. So this was created by a Harvard biologist, Dr. Joseph Pop, and it was distributed via floppy disk at International AIDS Conference. And he basically put a survey on the floppy disk as well and handed out saying, oh, the people saying, oh, fill out the survey. I, want to collect some data. So that got people to install the floppy disk into their computers and fill out the survey. But once installed, also put the AIDS virus on there as well. And what this would do is to start an internal counter that would increment every single time the user would boot up the computer. And once it hit 90, it would encrypt all the files and then display this screen, and then display another screen that would ask for a payment of between $170 to $300 to an address in Panama. And this kind of backfired for Pop. The encryption on the file was pretty poorly done and is pretty easily decrypted by anyone who knew what they were doing. And also, it was pretty easily traced back to him. So he was arrested and actually extradited to the UK, where the first instance of someone being affected by the AIDS Trojan virus happened. So another virus that came out in this year was the 1260 virus. So a hacker and computer scientist named Mark Washburn was helping disassemble the source code for a Vienna virus that was going around at the time. And after seeing this, he decided to use the code as a base for a demonstration virus to point out flaws in sort of antivirus and firewall works that other computer scientists are doing. So this virus is never released out into the world, but only kind of shown off on test computers as an example. So it worked by encrypting various .com files in the system, and it would increase their size to 1260 bytes, which is where it's got its name from. Basically, the big issue it caused for antivirus stuff at this time is that it was the first polymorphic virus. So every single time that it would go and encrypt a file, it would do so in a different manner, so that once sort of cybersecurity experts found out how it was encrypting, it couldn't just use the same thing to decrypt all the files and had to put a lot more effort in. So you cannot use a string scanner or other common techniques to work, and kind of serve as a wake-up call to cybersecurity experts at the time. So a few other things that happened this time period is that the tech magazine Mondo 2000 is launched. It's a physical magazine. It's based out of the San Francisco area. And this would eventually become the magazine and tech media company known as Wired. Another magazine called Hacktick started up. It was an e-magazine, and like Phrack, it was kind of more on the detailed hacking side. And just like Phrack, the authorities kind of clashed with the people who made the magazine as well. Also this year, Tim Berners-Lee, a Stern computer scientist, came up with the first proposal for what would become the World Wide Web. And the first ever commercial ISP known as The World is launched in November out of Brookline, Massachusetts. And funny enough, their website is still up to this day. They're supposedly still offering dial-up services, if anyone actually wants that. So it's pretty cool. Now we move on to 1990, which is one of the sort of biggest years when it comes to cybersecurity issues. So one of the first sort of clashes between authorities and hackers this year was in the United States versus Riggs. So in 1990, a hacker known as Robert Riggs stole a document entirely from Bell South, which is a telecommunications company, and posted it on BBS. Then Craig Nydorf, or by his internet name Night Lightning, a co-editor of Phrack, saw the document and wanted to add it to the next issue of the magazine. So he took out any identifying details and added a document to an issue. So eventually the US government comes after the two of them and tries to charge them with, a bunch of crimes and stuff like that. And when it comes to Nydorf, they actually dropped the charges after 4 days in court because it's revealed that the document that had been stolen could be purchased for $13 from the company itself, while the U.S. government valued it $80,000. So that was a bit embarrassing for the prosecution and stuff. However, Riggs was not so lucky. He was sentenced to 21 months in jail because he had still broken into the systems of Bell South, and he got 2 years of supervised release. So up next, we have the raid on Stephen Jackson Games. So while the Secret Service was investigating Riggs, they found that this same Bell South document that he had stolen was also posted to a BBS based out of Phoenix, ran by Lloyd Blankenship, who at the time was an employee of Steve Jackson Games. And so in response, on March 1st, the Secret Service stormed the company seizing 300 floppy disks, 3 computers, and a copy of their unreleased tabletop game, GURP Cyberpunk, which actually delayed the release of the game, funnily enough, even though all this stuff was returned to them back in June. And then later on in 1993, Steve Jackson Games sued the Secret Service for unlawful seizure, leading to a minor win on 2 counts, $50,000, and having their attorney fees paid. So as you can see, some of these kind of prosecutions and these officers are getting a little zealous, trying to just nab hackers wherever they can. And this sort of overzealous attitude all sort of coalesces in Operation Sun Devil, which is actually named this way because the operation is based out of Arizona State Stadium, or near Arizona State Stadium, and their mascot is a Sun Devil. So before 1989, the U.S. government didn't care a ton about the actions of phreakers and hackers across the country, but then Congress gave permission to the U.S. Secret Service to investigate phreaking and hacking crimes, and they dove into an 18-month investigation on phreaking and hacking all across the country. So once this investigation was done, on May 7th and 8th, the USS, FBI, CIA, and local police launched raids across the country in 15 cities. They executed 27 search warrants, shut down 25 BBSs, seized 42 computers, and 23,000 floppy disks while arresting 3 men. So this is kind of somewhat apocalyptic in the short term for the hacker community, but in the long term, it was kind of not a huge deal because a lot of times the prosecution could not get charges to stick with these individuals, and when they did, it was pretty minor, just fines or community service, or at most, just a few years, a few months in jail. So it's kind of debatable if the operation was a success. Though one thing it did do is it really kind of angered the hacker community and kind of got them very annoyed as they felt like they were unjustly being persecuted for just advancing technology and carrying out their passions. So in response to these 3 incidents, one after another, many in sort of the hacking and tech community were getting very annoyed by law enforcement and the government. So in July, a bunch of them decided to found the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and this is formed to protect the civil liberties of internet users and such. So the EAF helps out by providing legal defense in court cases regarding cybercrimes, helps government entities understand technology and kind of differentiate, okay, this is more of a crime, this is more of exploratory hacking, and kind of give a basis for that, and also supports causes that seek to further internet freedom, sort of, hacking and tech community fighting back and having a force to rally behind in these situations now. Some other minor events is that the United Kingdom passes the Computer Misuse Act, which bans unauthorized access to systems in the country, kind of following the US bill that was passed in 1986. Australian police arrest multiple members of a hacking group called Realm, and this is the first time that remote data is ever used as evidence in a case. And Tim Berners-Lee puts up the first ever web page around Christmas time, though this is not very much well publicized until 1991. So now moving into 1991. So while the Great Hacker War itself did start in 1990, most of the big events and stuff took place in 1991. So I felt it better fit here. And 1990 is a little crowded already anyway. So the Great Hacker War was a series of attacks between 2 of the biggest and most notable hacker groups in the country, the Masters of Deception and a subset of the Legion of Doom. So it kind of started a little bit with some minor incidents between the 2 beforehand. So a smaller group of the Legion of Doom blamed the Masters of Deception for the closure of a popular BBS. And kind of after talking a little bit between the 2, some members of the Legion of Doom then called members of the Masters of Deception racial slurs. One thing about the 2 groups of Legion of Doom was mainly sort of white Texans, and the Masters of Deception was a racially diverse group of people from inner city New York. So there's some kind of more conflict about that, more or less. The war was kind of fought through members, group prank calling each other, infiltrating networks exclusive to the groups. Master Deceptions also tried to go after ComSec, which is a cybersecurity startup that the Legion of Doom founded. And the war ended up ending in 1992 of July because pretty much all the members of the Masters Deception were arrested by federal police due to hacking crimes. And so the years passed, both sides kind of, try to de-escalate it, or, try to play it down, saying it wasn't a war, just a bunch of pranks and stuff like that. It wasn't really a big deal. So the actual effect over is a war or just silly stuff is sort of debated, but it's a very sort of popular event in hacking history. Also, 1991 is the arrest of Kevin Paulson. So throughout the early 80s, he was one of the most prolific hackers and phreakers in all of Southern California, and had committed at least 4 different crimes against Pacific Bell, which is a telecommunications company there as well. So after his first arrest in 1983, he pretended to sort of, turn over a new leaf by joining a military think tank called SRI. But outside of work, all he did was kind of use his new connections and technology to still commit these sort of illegal actions and sort of satisfy this urge he had. So eventually another warrant was put out for his arrest in 1989, and Paulson was a fugitive for the next 18 months. As mentioned in a presentation earlier in the semester, as a fugitive, he hacked a live radio show and got himself a free Porsche from it by sort of jamming on the phone lines. And he also jammed on the phone lines when an episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired involving him. So one of the most skilled hackers at the time to do this stuff so easily. And eventually on April 11th, 1991, he was captured and ended up serving around 5 years in prison. So we're moving right on to 1993. Is 1992 didn't really have any big enough incidents in the hacking or cybersecurity scenes that really warrant any mention. So by this point in 1993, the World Wide Web had kind of been starting to build up. It existed. There are some other internet browsers. And so at this time, 2 software engineers at the National Center of Supercomputing Applications, based out of the UI-UC campus, were looking at them and decided, we can probably make a better one. So in the end of 1992, they start working on the application in the browser, and April 22nd, they released version 1.0 to the world. So Mosaic was not the first internet browser, but it was in fact revolutionary because it allowed for non-text-based features to be displayed, some very just pretty nice graphics. It was available on Windows, unlike most which are available only on Linux and Unix systems. And it's a very much overall ease of use that allowed non-tech savvy people to easily access the internet. So it really became like the first big browser that blew up and, got a lot of non-tech people onto the internet for the first time. Mark and then Eric would actually leave the National Center for Supercomputing Applications soon after the release of Mosaic, and then actually went on to release Netscape in 1994, which was even bigger than Mosaic and kind of the ancestor of that. Also in 1993 was the first ever DEF CON convention. It was founded by Jeff Moss and first held on June 9th. So what actually happened is that a friend of Jeff Moss's was moving to Canada, so the 2 of them decided to go to Las Vegas to celebrate, but his friend ended up leaving for Canada early and couldn't make the trip anymore. So Jeff ended up just messaging all of his hacking friends and say, let's come to Las Vegas, we'll celebrate this. And it was also sort of a celebration because a lot of BBSs were shutting down and the sort of new age of the internet was sort of starting up. And the name of this was taken actually from War Games again, referring to the U.S.'s Defense Readiness Condition. And so the event was a great success. He had a ton of positive feedback, and due to this, he decided, let's do it again, next year. And at this point, it's been running for almost 30 years. It's the biggest hacking convention in the world, and has 30,000 attendees yearly. Now we're moving into 1994. One thing I mentioned about this year is that by this point, most BBSs were dead. Most of the sort of hacking communities had moved to the World Wide Web and internet-based sites for their work. So in the summer of this year, Vladimir Levin, a Moscow-based programmer, stole around $10 million from various Citibank accounts and sent the money to colleagues across the world. So soon after, most of the conspirators were nabbed. All but $400,000 of the money was, recovered. And Levin was arrested at a London airport on his way back to Moscow and extradited to the U.S., which It was very lucky timing and very difficult because Russia actually disallows extradition of their own citizens, so it was a very kind of tight window to get him. So the funny thing about this is that actually around a decade after, a hacker as part of a hacker group came out and said that Levin didn't actually do any work of getting into the system. That him and his hacker group had actually been the one to do it, but were not interested in stealing any money and just kind of playing around with it. And one of his friends then sold the access info to Levin for around $100. So that's pretty interesting. So also in 1994, AOL was released. It was the first prominent piece of hacking software for AOL Online and incredibly easy to use and download. It was created by a 17-year-old hacker from Pittsburgh and had a suite of functions that allowed anyone with a basic computer knowledge to do a large number of hacking infractions, such as creation of fake AOL accounts for free usage, phishing tools, mail bombs, IM hunters, mass ASCII art generators, and more. The software was, profoundly abused by script kiddies and, people thought it was funny to mail bomb others. And for a little while, most AOL users would have their inboxes maxed out, and a lot of online chat rooms would just be plagued with just ASCII art from AOL. This is kind of one of the first pieces of just easily sent out, easily usable script kiddie hacking software. Now we finally finish off in 1995. So in this year, famous and prolific computer hacker and social engineer Kevin Mitnick was arrested. So Kevin was born in Southern California in 1963. His first arrest came in 1989 after he hacked into the systems of the Digital Equipment Corporation all the way back in 1979. And for this, he served 1 year in prison, along with 3 years of supervised release. Near the end of these 3 years, he was caught violating the terms of this release by hacking into the systems of Pacific Bell, and this led for a warrant to be put out for his arrest. He then went on the run for the next 2.5 years as a fugitive, using cloned cell phones to hide his location and committing a lot of computer crimes on the run as well. Eventually, he was tracked down by computer security expert Tsutomu Shimomura on February 15th and arrested. It's a pretty famous game of cat and mouse the two played. It's actually been made, to a movie, and they've both written books, and it's pretty, famous sort of event. For this, he was sentenced to 68 months in prison. Funnily enough, he was put in solitary confinement for 8 months because of a rumor that by whistling into a phone, he could launch nuclear weapons. So the media kind of took with him and ran with his story. But now, as of today, he works as a freelance security consultant. So now that we've come through to the end of this presentation, I just want to kind of talk about some of the themes and through lines that are present throughout. One of the first ones is kind of the perception of hackers by the government and general populace. More or less the populace and government has been, for this whole entire period is incredibly hostile to the hackers. Doesn't really differentiate between, the sort of, white hat and black hat, or, what's a serious crime and what's just, kids being kids. Kind of, falling into this trap of taking war games as facts. And because of this, you kind of ostracized the hacker community, and I think in a sort of way kind of turn them into more hardened criminals, because they're kind of like, if you're gonna, think we're criminals, then we'll actually become real criminals. So yeah, looking back, I wonder if hackers and people like this have been treated with more respect and kind of more honor, how the cybersecurity scene would look today. So another kind of aspect of this is balancing individual freedom and technological progress against security and the rights of property owners. Obviously, as much as the next kind of computer guy, I love seeing technology progress and, see stuff like this pushed forward. But at what line are these hackers sort of crossing the line and, going from, research and pushing things forward to just breaking into systems, for their own fun and, just doing things maliciously. Another thing is sort of, what these first viruses looked like, and how these foundational viruses for all the types of viruses deal today kind of set the precedent for, how attacks are carried out now. It's very interesting going back and seeing these earlier versions of viruses you hear about all the time, and how these original forms lead to what we have today. So just due to the large amount of sources I used, I attached a Google Doc that should link to all of them. in the presentation. I just want to say it's a lot of fun to do as a project, and appreciate the opportunity to do so.